And welcome to the One Hood Power Sunday Night SitDown. Every Sunday night, we will sit down with the candidate running for office in the upcoming special election or the spring primary. We see the Sunday Night SitDown as an opportunity to go in depth with the candidates who will be asking for your vote in 2022. Tonight, we are excited to bring on Martell Covington, candidate for the Pennsylvania State House 24th District. Welcome to the Sunday Night SitDown.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
I'm excited to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on this evening. Congratulations on your recent announcement running for the State House. And for those who aren't familiar with the numbers of all the districts, that is the seat being vacated by now Mayor Allegheny, the 24th Legislative District. And just another point of information, there will be a special election on April 5th to fulfill the rest of State Representative Gainey's term. And at least still on the books is a May 17th primary election to fulfill a full 2-year term, but it's still unknown if, because of the delays with the maps, if we will have that primary on May 17th. But we do know there is a special election for that seat on April 5th. And I believe that you're running in both the special election and the primary.
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Yeah. So to jump right into it, tell us a little bit about what some unique, qualities you bring to the race, and just a little bit of background about yourself.
Definitely. So I think one thing that's unique about myself is I've been born and raised in the 24th District. I grew up in Homewood. After school, I came back and lived in Homewood. I've made sure that we've plugged into the 24th District throughout my life. And, I'm continuing to do that right now. Even before the announcement, we were plugged into the 24th District. I think some unique qualities about myself that, we bring to this race is creativity, courage, and conviction. And these are qualities that are part of our campaign. Courage to take a big step, a big brave step and enter a race in some uncertain times like this. Conviction to tell my story and the story of other people, and the creativity to connect generations that have been divided, historically. And also another thing is mindfulness. For some people, mindfulness is a meditation practice, but also mindfulness is a way of life. It's a state of being, being present, thinking about people, thinking about the most forgotten people, and how they could be part of this campaign. So we're moving with mindfulness as well through this campaign.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. I apologize for that. My second question was could you name a political leader, either from history or a current political leader, that you draw inspiration from?
Definitely. So I'm pretty sure some people may not have heard of my, the political leader that I draw inspiration from. But a couple of years ago, I was gifted by my mother African ancestry kit. And I learned my paternal lineage came from the Marca people in a West African country named Burkina Faso. So as I learned about the people in this country, I learned about Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara was the first president of Burkina Faso and the 5th prime minister of Upper Volta. He changed the entire country, including the name, to Burkina Faso, which means the land of the incorruptible people. He moved the country to be less dependent upon France. He made sure that the country was more healthy overall, increasing vaccination rates, decreasing infant mortality rates. He also increased the literacy rate in the country, and improving women's rights was one of the large parts of his policy. He was the first African leader to appoint women to major cabinet positions and actively recruit women into the military. His government banned female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and polygamy. And he called for a united front of African nations to repudiate their foreign debt. He argued that the poor and the exploited did not have an obligation to repay money to the rich and the exploiting. He led the country from 1983 to 1987. He was assassinated during a coup that was launched by his one-time friend and colleague. And ironically, there was a military coup in Burkina Faso earlier this week. So I'm definitely praying for my people. But Thomas Sankara is definitely somebody that, since I've learned about, he has been a leader. And to, like, I guess, give something that can kind of compare to, he would be like George Washington. He's like the George Washington for Burkina Faso. People revere George Washington over here. So that would be an equivalence for people to understand. But that's somebody that's inspired me a lot.
Yeah, thank you for that. My next question was, now that we have a little bit of background of who Martell Covington is, tell us a little bit about, what motivated you to enter into this race and go from one area of public service to, one where you actually throw your hat in the ring and run for office.
Yes, sir. So what motivated me was the year 2020. The entire year was a life-changing year for me. I lost loved ones to COVID-19, including my brother-in-law. I lost loved ones to gun violence, including my 15-year-old nephew. Between these pandemics, the social justice movement, the attacks on democracy, people losing their jobs, losing their homes, and everything else that happened that year, as I sheltered in place while still working, I was, hearing issues and concerns of over 1,000 people that year with a variety of issues, and they didn't know what to do or where to turn. And it was at that point that I knew more had to be done. That's when I knew that when the time came, we had to take that big leap. People needed supports, people needed a champion, and seeing that year and uncertainty and seeing things continue on in 2021, including January 6th and things after that, I just knew, like, we had to make this happen. We had to do this. So those are the things that motivated me. I know it might not be the most, shite, briny, positive story, but it's real life. It's my story, and it's the district and our constituent story as well.
Thank you for that. My next question is kind of bringing your background as well as your aspiration, to seek public office, bringing that together. Now, you've spent the last several years working in state government. What are some ways you plan to put that experience to use as a legislator?
Thank you. Yes, sir. Well, first, I definitely plan to use my experience to effectively staff and manage a district office. Understanding the importance of educating, informing, and supporting staff members, while creating an environment that has shared values, that is respectful and safe. Also having a nuanced understanding of the importance of constituent services and how to support our constituents, whether that's with unemployment issues that are still ongoing, going into the second year, issues with PennDOT, supporting residents with their property tax and rent rebates, advocating for people and families dealing with Department of Aging, Department of Health, probation and parole, utility commissions, and also using my knowledge of stakeholders and relationships with those stakeholders that will allow for a swift development of partnerships and collaborations.
Thank you for that. In your mind, what are some of the most important issues impacting the 24th legislative district, and what are things that you believe can be done at the state level to address those challenges?
I know that depending where you're standing at in the 24th district, people in that community may list different issues as most important. In East Hills, people may talk about the lack of opportunity for young people and the increase in gun violence. Areas like Homewood and Wilkinsburg dealing with blighted buildings or the lack of opportunity and resources. And also environmental issues are important to people in this district, but we have to address poverty in this district. Some of the communities with the lowest life expectancy rates in the city are in this district. Issues with guns and gun violence, the lack of affordable housing that is also safe and habitable, as well as employment opportunities. We have to make sure that we're focusing on improving the overall health of the district, ensuring that people are being connected to already existing programming and resources focused on health. And we have to be intentional about uplifting organizations and efforts that are working to end gun violence and increase affordable housing and employment opportunities, making sure that Harrisburg is supporting this work through grants and other resources to expand the depth and the breadth of people on the ground that are working every day to lift people up.
Thank you for that. My next question is focusing on an issue that you raised in your earlier comments around voting rights, um, around the democracy itself. In 2019, Act 77 passed with wide bipartisan support. And for those who are unaware with Act 77, that was the law that, in the unbeknownst to the legislator, in the months prior to the pandemic, a law was passed that created the mail-in voting, that created the satellite voting centers, that created a lot of the resources that voters used in 2020 to have in many parts of the state historic and record voter turnout. Now, 2.5 to 3 years later, there's numerous legislative attempts to roll back many of the reforms that were instituted in Act 77. And as someone who currently works in state government, I'm sure you're aware of some of these attempts. How concerned are you about some of the current attempts, such as creating a partisan redistricting committee, as well as judicial gerrymandering and other issues? How concerned are you about the ability for Pennsylvanians to be able to participate in free and fair elections, without forms of voter suppression?
Yes, sir. So I think it's important that we acknowledge the historical attempts of voter suppression since Reconstruction. There have historically been efforts to keep, the votes of Black people, brown people, marginalized people, working class folks. There have been, century-long efforts to keep us from voting because they know that when we vote, we win. The Act 77 of 2019 and Act 12 of 2020 brought historical changes to the PA election code, and it really started to bring the Commonwealth into the new century. There are a magnitude of other states that have kind of already been using some of the methods that we brought forward in 2019 and 2020, basically increasing the accessibility to register to vote and to vote. And to answer your question, it's very concerning, when you have individuals that are actively working to suppress our votes, therefore attempting to suppress part of our power, especially after we've seen over the last 14 months. And I definitely want to acknowledge the governor, members of the Democratic caucuses, both House and Senate, and people-led organizations that are fighting to keep our elections fair. And also I want to mention that the PA House Dems have over 25 bills right now that defend our democracy and protect our vote. I don't, for time's sake, I don't want to go into each single bill and what they do, but, we'll be able to kind of touch on some of the important pieces as we go on. But I just want to acknowledge the PA House Dems that, when January 6th of this year unfolded, a slate of some real progressive, real sound legislation to protect our vote.
Thank you for that. And just staying on the topic of voting rights, we saw at the federal level the voting rights proposals not being able to make it through the Senate. And in the event that federal legislation doesn't get through, what things would you like to see done at the state level? And or even if you could elaborate a bit on some of those proposals that you said came from the House Democratic Caucus that could do some of the things, at least here in the state of Pennsylvania, that the federal legislation, the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Act, the For the People Act, it was aiming to do at the national level, but doesn't appear to have the support in the Senate to make it happen.
Right. I appreciate this question because it definitely it allows for us to kind of share about some of the work that PA has done. So there's a Voting Rights Act that has been introduced here in Pennsylvania. It's the K. Leroy Irvis Voting Rights Protection Act. It's HB 2090, and it's prime sponsored by Democratic House Leader Joanna McClinton. The bill was named after K. Leroy Irvis, who was a PA state representative from this side of the state. And he was the first African-American to serve as Speaker of the House in any state legislature in the United States since Reconstruction. So, you know, it's a big show of respect to kind of name this bill after him. But what I can do as a state rep is sign on to co-sponsor this bill on day one. And not only, you know, signing on to this bill, but becoming a vocal supporter of this comprehensive election reform legislation. And just to share a little bit about what this bill does, it establishes early voting location for 15 days leading up to the election, you know, to allow voters to cast their ballot on their schedule. It allows for same day voter registration on election day, which is a best practice for increasing participation in elections in at least 18 states. It implements statewide electronic poll books for secure real-time monitoring of election rolls as used in at least 35 other states. And it allows voters to cure defects, basically to change mistakes on submitted ballots so that voters are not disenfranchised by small errors in filling out their ballot. And in addition, you know, this legislation will allow counties to place ballots received without a secrecy envelope into a new envelope to secure the secrecy of the ballot. You know, and lastly, one issue that we had in Allegheny County last election or the past two elections is about ballot box drop-offs. So this legislation will require each county to have at least two ballot drop boxes and at least one for every 50,000 residents. And counties are also required to provide a drop box on campuses, public university campuses, and community colleges with at least 10,000 students. You know, so there are a lot of other, you know, really, really great things as part of this, you know, HB 2090. But this is a step in the right direction. You know, this is a way that when things can't get done at the federal level, you know, the state legislature is able to step in and make sure that our vote is protected here in Pennsylvania. Because we know we're a battleground state now. You know, our votes matter, you know, in statewide, local elections, and also national elections. So, you know, I want to salute Leader McClinton, who's been on the front lines of a lot of different things as far as protecting the votes. You know, she was also the frontline advocate for, you know, abolishing prison gendermandering. You know, so it's really, you know, cool to be able to learn about these legislative measures and have the opportunity to really kind of like speak on them and stand on them. But HB 2090 is definitely a piece of legislation if you are interested in learning, you know, to give that a look online so you can learn a little bit more about what that bill does.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad you brought up you know, interesting point that I would love for you to elaborate on, you know, just a little bit. You mentioned prison gerrymandering and the work that Leader McClinton did. Can you just talk a little bit about what that is? Because one thing that we want to do, you know, on all of our platforms is do, you know, civic education and political education when we have the opportunity. And this is an issue that, you know, we've been vocal about. But you can talk a little bit about what the issue is and what happened at the state level through the leadership of Joanna McClinton, the Democratic leader, who's been a guest on the show a number of times as well.
Yes, sir. So basically, prison gerrymandering is using the numbers of incarcerated persons in that particular area and county where they are being incarcerated. So people that are in SCI Dallas or SCI Mercer or Fayette or wherever individuals may be, they are being counted in that county and not being counted in their last home residence, whether that's somewhere in Philadelphia or somewhere in Pittsburgh or somewhere in Erie or somewhere in Lancaster, wherever these individuals may have been from, they are now being counted in those counties. A lot of those counties are red states. I mean, not red states, but red counties. A lot of those areas are heavily red areas, and they are using those numbers to count as population, when it comes to the redistricting, so the population is augmented because you include the prison population. So that allows for them to kind of say, well, we have this X amount of people in this county, therefore we can create this district, we can create this boundary because we have this amount of people, but this measure will now allow people to use or to be able to vote from their most recent residence. Like I said, whether that's in Philly or, Scranton or wherever they may have been from in the Commonwealth, it takes them out of that county where they're being incarcerated at.
Thank you for that breakdown. Now, moving from kind of statewide issues and voting rights and things that really get sussed out in Harrisburg, I wanted to turn our perspective back locally, and we all know in recent times there's been a lot of discussion about the inequity in the Pittsburgh region. As a potential state legislator, what are things? What are things that you want to do in your position to address regional inequity, even if there are some issues that obviously aren't directly impacted by state policy?
Mm-hmm. So first, what I want to do, what I plan to do is a lot of times there are hearings that are held. Representatives and senators hold hearings on a variety of issues, and I think it's important that we hold some hearings in our region, and in our communities that are focusing on some of the issues that have been addressed in the racial inequities highlighted through the race and gender report. We have to talk about the devastating low quality of overall life for Black women in this city. We have to focus on, intently focus on maternal health, policy focused on Black women's maternal health, including infant health. Some of the statistics on racial and gender equity, for some that don't know, Black women die at twice the rate of their white counterparts in childbirth. Black infants die at 3 times the rate. Black women are living in poverty at 3 times the rate of white men. Black women are making about 20 to 25 cents lower on the dollar in Pittsburgh than the national average for women, making 80 cents per dollar compared to white men in America. We also have to talk about occupational segregation, making sure that people know what that is and how Black people in the city are facing it, particularly Black men. Occupational segregation occurs when one demographic or group is overrepresented or underrepresented among different kinds of work or different types of jobs. And then also some of the ways that we could address these inequities or supporting and co-sponsoring legislation that will take on some of these issues. For example, Representative Morgan Cephas's House Bill 1173, 74, and 75, which, expand Medicaid to postpartum care, fight maternal mortality and morbidity, advocating for doula coverage through Medicaid. And, we also have to encourage continued collaboration with stakeholders and organizations that are already addressing these inequities. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We just want to make sure that we're supporting those already invented wheels. It's important to lift up the voices of the people that are doing this work and have been doing the work, making sure that their voices are being heard in Harrisburg, and that we're connecting them with resources, funding, and support to continue and augment that work. So it's a lot to address, but it's important that we do so. Time is of the essence. We're losing people figuratively and literally every day. So as a state representative, it's important to plug into those issues. And if it's not something that can be enforced through policy, it needs to be enforced through influence, through connections, through relationships, through collaborations. But it's going to have to be an all hands on deck from day one, as we step into this office.
Thank you. And my final question before we go into our closing questions. Um, it focuses around expectations. Now we know when elected leaders come into office, there's high expectations. We're obviously experiencing that at the federal level, in the White House, and people expect things to get done quickly. And there's issues from housing, to climate change, to voting rights, to now reproductive rights, and other issues that currently are being discussed as we speak in Harrisburg. How will you manage expectations of getting things done in a quick way, understanding there is a process, while also understanding the urgency of the moment, that we do need to get things done, but there is a process?
Right. It's it's hard to tell marginalized and oppressed people to be patient, Um, that's something that I've understood working in the senator's office, and that's something that I step into this race knowing. Um, but however things are happening, you look at what Pittsburgh City Council is doing with the traffic stop legislation, for example. And then also, you look at the Housing Opportunity Fund as a good example. But also, we have to make sure that community input on legislation is something that is a given moving forward. We have to make sure that we're really plugging in with constituents, we're plugging in with supporters, with advocates as we, bring forward policy and bring forward legislation. But I understand the urgency, like I mentioned before, we're losing people figuratively and literally. But it's about kind of being able to strike a balance, being able to make sure that we're talking about the issues, making sure that the public, that the people are informed about these nuanced issues that may not impact them, but impact their neighbors, impact their colleagues and impact their coworkers, impact the people that they may work out with or worship with. We have to make sure that people understand what each of us is going through, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to lift each other up through this, so making sure that we're policy focused, but making sure that we're people focused too, is really important. But then being a listener, being accessible and being a listener, I think are important things right now. And making sure that people understand the legislative process as well. A lot of people haven't taken civics or didn't take social studies and are unaware of the process, so sometimes we have to take a moment to make sure that our people know how things go and, and how things happen. So, in addition to being an advocate and being a supporter, we want to make sure that we're educating people on how things are happening, and why things are not happening as well.
Thank you for that. So for those who want to get in touch with your campaign, want to learn more about you, where do they go? How can they follow you on social media? What is the best ways to get in touch with your campaign?
Yes, sir. Well, first, our website is up and running, martellforpa.com. That's Martell with two L's, for pa.com. We're also on Instagram and Twitter. Both are @ Martell for PA. And for Facebook, facebook.com/Martell, the number 4 PA. So that's how everybody can reach into us. We're definitely, very active on social media. We also have a YouTube channel as well for those that are on YouTube. So subscribe to Martell PA State House District 24 on YouTube as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And then with our final question, we always ask the question. It was a tradition started by my co-host Miracle Jones, and the question is simply, what brings you joy?
Thank you for asking this question, because it's important that we find joy in times like this. So for me, spending Friday nights with my partner, watching Black television shows from the 90s, spending time with my grandma and my plants. You have a plant collection that brings me joy. And lastly, visiting my babies and my young people over at Community Empowerment in Homewood, because they always show the most love. So that's definitely those are the things that bring me joy.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Martell Covington, candidate for the Pennsylvania State House in the April 5th special election and in the upcoming spring primary election as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to being in touch with you over the course of the next few months, and best of luck.
Yes, sir. This was dope. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. And again, Martell Covington, candidate for the Pennsylvania State House District 24, running in the April 5th special election, but also running in the spring primary that is still scheduled for May 17th, but there is a possibility that the May 17th primary may be delayed due to the time that it is taking to finalize the new legislative maps in Harrisburg. I want to thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Sunday Night Sit Down. Please join us tomorrow night on the One Hood Power Hour, where we will be joined by Michael Rose and Mayor Dante Comins of Wilkinsburg to discuss the future of Wilkinsburg. As you know, there's been a lot of discussion and organizing on both sides of the idea of Wilkinsburg joining the city of Pittsburgh or Wilkinsburg remaining an independent borough outside of the city of Pittsburgh. So we will talk to a proponent of the idea of annexation, and then Mayor Comins, who has taken the position of not necessarily being opposed or in support of the annexation, but has definitely been publicly opposed to the public process that has taken place up to this point. So that'll be tomorrow night on the One Hood Power Hour. Again, thank you so much for joining us on the Sunday Night Sit Down. We will be back next Sunday at 7 p.m. We will make the announcement of who will be joining us tomorrow night on the One Hood Power Hour, where, again, we will be talking about the future of Wilkinsburg. Thank you once again, and see you tomorrow night at 7 for the One Hood Power Hour. Take care.